and welcome, class, to History 101, Fort Wayne, Indiana. I came to Fort Wayne in 1975, and back then, the only famous thing about Fort Wayne was they had this huge shopping mall called Glenbrook. Even had an indoor ice rink. That was its claim to fame back in 1975. And not many big things have happened in the city of Fort Wayne over the years since that time I arrived. Probably the two biggest things I recall is the blizzard of 1978 and the flood of 1982. Those are probably the two biggest events I remember in Fort Wayne, but right now we're going to discuss the blizzard of 1978, because if you weren't here, you missed something really, really incredible. Let me tell you my particular story as to how it occurred around me. I was out busy working on it. It was a late January. I think it was around January 25th of 1978. I was in sales at that time, and that meant you're driving all around the city, talking to people and working on orders and, doing what you could to market your products. And that's what I did. And I was listening on the radio. The radio I listened to back in those days was WOWO. They had this weatherman on there. His name was Earl Finkel, if I recall. And I remember he was talking about a potential storm that was coming, and it was coming up from the southwest, but there was something in the west. And anyway, it was typical Earl Finkel stuff, and you didn't pay much attention to it because, it's Indiana. It's winter. That's what happens. Storms. Well, that was a Wednesday night, if I recall correctly. So I decided that, I was going to go out Wednesday night for something to do, and there was a club in Fort Wayne on North Wells Street, just before it gets into Lima Road. It's called the Bombay Eagle, and it was a disco and a restaurant, kind of a high-end place, if you remember, for those of you who were around here. The Bombay Eagle, that was the place to go. That was back then. Disco was the biggest thing going on, and if you were into disco, you went to the Bombay Eagle. So I decided to get myself gussied up and went to the Bombay Eagle. And I was inside there just, looking to have a good time. And around 10 o'clock, I decided to mosey out to the front lobby. And there was a glass doors there. You come in, you go to one side was the disco, the other side was the restaurant. So I happened to look out the front door, and it was snowing. It was snowing pretty good. And I mean, it was snowing a lot. And I said to myself, that snow's looking pretty bad. So I said, well, I'm going to end my evening at the Bombay Eagle. I'm going to put on my coat, and I'm going to head back to my apartment, because back in those days, I lived at a place called Canterbury Green Apartments. And that was the apartment complex to live in back in those days. I mean, if you lived in Fort Wayne, if you didn't live in Canterbury, you didn't live anywhere. And that's where I lived. So I got in my car and drove very carefully and slowly, because the snow was starting to accumulate, over to my apartment in Canterbury. I lived on a road called Trumper, Trumper, Trumper Way. It's kind of a cul-de-sac the way it worked out. And my building faced, the back of the building faced to the west. I would overlook part of the golf course, the 9th green, the 2nd green, and 1st and 2nd. There was a stream right down the center of Canterbury, and I could look straight down that stream. That was the look out my back porch. I was living on the 3rd floor at that time. And anyway, so there I was, went in my apartment, got there finally, maybe about close to 11 o'clock. So I had to go to bed. Woke up about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the wind was howling. And I mean, it was howling. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to look outside and see what it was looking like outside. When I flashed the flashlight, it's a wall of white. The windows on my side of the building, the back of my apartment, if you will, were simply covered with snow. I mean, it was packed with snow. You couldn't shine the light through anything. You couldn't see anything. So I said, what the heck? I'm going to go out into the living room where I had a sliding glass door and take a look out there and see what I could see. And I did. Same problem. Completely covered with snow. And the wind was howling. That was Wednesday night. Next morning, it was still howling. It was still snowing. And it was a record snowfall, when you think about it. And it was like how many inches per hour we could get the wind. And the winds were just blowing like it was a severe blizzard. They said the winds were, 40, 50 miles an hour. I heard gusts, some places over to 80 miles an hour. Visibility was less than a quarter of a mile down to a 16th of a mile, what it was reported. So a blizzard, you can't see anything. And it went on the entire day Thursday. And finally, Thursday night, going into Friday morning, about 2 o'clock in the morning, you heard voices. I mean, voices will bounce off of snow. They will. And I could hear people yelling, screaming, whatever they were doing. I heard sound of people talking. And I went, whoa, there was no more sound. I mean, there was no more blowing. The wind was gone. It was over. And people in my apartment complex went outside the building to, walk around. I don't think walk around is probably the right term. Trudge around. That might have been the thing, trudging. And the snow was everywhere. I mean, the piles of drifts were like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. And frankly, when I was a kid, I lived in Alaska. I didn't see anything like that up in Alaska. But boy, I saw it in Fort Wayne for that blizzard. So there it was. Everybody was completely stone cold locked in. I mean, locked in big time. You couldn't move, couldn't do anything. Pretty bad. So what happened was that turns out that, a lot of folks out there didn't have anything in their pantries, as you're willing to say. So they said, let's go over to the marketplace of Canterbury, which was right next door to Canterbury Green. There's a Rogers Market in there. I remember that. And so I trekked across the golf course, waist-high snow that I remember. I can't remember how long it took me, but I finally made it over to the marketplace and went into the Rogers store, and it was packed full of people. But the weird thing was they were all lined up, quiet. Nobody was yelling, screaming. It was just, they were numb cold, I guess. But the carts, people were lined up all the way to the back of the Rogers store. And you went by carts, you walked by carts, and there were empty wrappers of carts, and people were standing there eating right out of their grocery cart. Well, I managed to buy what I needed and had a big sack. I thought, God, how am I going to get this sack back to the apartment? Well, just so happens, and by fate being what fate is, a friend of mine, or one of the people I knew in Canterbury, came by and was on a snowmobile, no less. I don't know how he got a snowmobile, where he got a snowmobile. I don't think he kept it at Canterbury. I don't know where he got it, but he had a snowmobile, came up and he said, hey, you need a ride? I said, yes. So I took my pack of groceries over my back, big, like a big grocery bag. Not a grocery bag, it's almost like a garbage bag. I had a big garbage bag. And I rode like Santa, riding on the back of a snowmobile. We rode and tricked our way through and went through snow and everything else and finally got to Trumper Way in Canterbury. And I finally got off and trudged my groceries up, and there I was. So I was fine for the weekend. Everything was hunky-dory. Everything was hunky-dory. And I didn't have to go back to work until Monday, but fortunately that I would have been able to go back anyway. But there were some stories that I heard from police friends of mine. One story sticks in my mind, and I've told this a number of times. There was a lady out there who was driving on the road, and the roads, is the first thing you want to plow are the roads. So when everything happened on Friday morning, you had your snow plows out there, the graders and everything, and they're doing what they do and moving as much snow as they can. So some of the roads were actually, the main roads were not snow-free, but certainly had snow off the way so they could drive. There was a Jeep. Jeep come driving up the road. The police officers are seeing this Jeep coming up the road. Because the only thing out there were either snowmobiles or four-wheel drive vehicles, whether they were Jeep or harvesters, for crying out loud, because back in those days, harvesters were, made in Fort Wayne. So people were there, this Jeep was coming up the road, and the police had a fatality. An elderly person had passed away. And police were there, and they said, we have to get that person's body up to the hospital, where they had a morgue or whatever. And they flagged down the Jeep. There was a Jeep, inside was a lady and two kids. And the police said, we've got an emergency, ma'am. We need to take this body. You need to take it up to Parkview Hospital, because this was I believe it was along State, somewhere near close to Northside High School, somewhere in that area. And they said, you need to take this body up to Parkview, which is, half a mile or so away. She said, my God, I got my kids in my car. I just went and got some food and everything. No, sorry, ma'am, but you have to do this. They took the body, put it in the car with these kids. And ultimately, the lady apparently drove it to Parkview and took it in there and said, here, this person died, whatever. And you wonder how the children today, they even remember this happening. Sure, the lady who was driving the Jeep remembers, but that's one of the issues that happened. Things when weather goes like that, things are going to happen. And they did. And all I can tell you is it was one of the more amazing times that I have ever seen. The homes were completely covered, the cars were covered. But you know what? People got along. People were seeing each other, just talking with each other. People in my building, it was a party, because nobody else was going anywhere. But that was the snow. That was the late January 1978, the blizzard. And the blizzard wasn't just Fort Wayne; it was all of Indiana. Matter of fact, I think it's the first time Indiana's ever had a complete blizzard warning in the entire state. I think that was the first time it ever happened. And they had a blizzard warning. It hit everywhere. Well, ultimately, snows go away, snows melt, they did. But here's something interesting. Over at Northcrest Shopping Center, remember Northcrest back in those days? There was a nice Pizza Hut over there, and they had, I can't remember all the stores. Oh, I think there was a Montgomery Ward. Montgomery Ward was at the one end. I think that's where a Kohl's is now. Montgomery Ward was there. But what they did in Northcrest, they made a big giant snow mound, all these snow cats that they have, and he made a huge mound in Northcrest of snow. That mound of snow did not finish melting, until June of 1978. Now, here's a storm that started in January, and the snow did not melt in the Northcrest parking lot, because I remember going to Northcrest because that was one of the places you went to. That was if you didn't want to go to the mall, you went to Northcrest because the Pizza Hut was there. And that's how the storm of 1978 was, folks. And it was something to behold, something very special, something unique, and some tragedy along the way. But anybody who lived through that storm could say, yes, I was there. Yes, I saw it. Yes, I lived through it. Would I want to do it again? Well, the only thing I can tell you is the current meteorologists are saying all the weather conditions today, 2025, are the same identical weather conditions that resulted in the blizzard of 1978. And it's the same conditions that exist today. Will it happen again? I certainly hope not. But if it does, you have been warned. And now you know.